don't remember the moment you learned it. There was no announcement, no ceremony, just a quiet calculation your nervous system made before your mind had language. You learned that some people do not handle truth gently, that some people collect vulnerability the way others collect weapons, that the wrong emotion shown to the wrong person can be used against you later, reshaped, repeated, weaponized. So you became careful. You learned to keep your face neutral, your voice steady, your inner world sealed behind practiced calm. And on the surface, it looks like strength. But here is the paradox you live inside. The restraint that once kept you safe is now slowly cutting you off from being fully alive. You are not cold. You are not unfeeling. You are not distant by nature. You are guarded because you had to be. There are people in this world who do not deserve access to your inner weather, not your grief, not your hope, not your fear, not your joy. And yet, the problem is never that you learned this rule. The problem is that your nervous system never learned when to stop using it. So you walk through life composed, controlled, unreadable. You listen more than you speak. You reveal just enough to stay connected, but never enough to be exposed. And part of you believes this is maturity, self-mastery, wisdom earned through pain. But another part of you feels the cost, the loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being unseen, the exhaustion of constant self-monitoring, the quiet grief of knowing that if someone truly touched the center of you, you wouldn't know how to stay open without bracing for impact. This is not about never showing emotion. It's about never showing emotion to people who once proved they couldn't hold it safely. And the dark truth is this: when emotional restraint becomes your identity instead of a choice, you don't just hide from others, you hide from yourself. Psychologically, this pattern does not emerge from nowhere. It is forged in environments where emotional expression was punished, ignored, or strategically exploited. Sometimes it comes from emotional neglect, where your feelings were met with silence, dismissal, or inconvenience. You learned that expressing emotion changed nothing, so you stopped. Sometimes it comes from betrayal, where vulnerability was later thrown back at you during conflict. You learned that honesty could be stored and used against you. Sometimes it comes from power imbalance, a parent, authority figure, or partner whose moods dictated safety. You learned to read the room, not express yourself. Over time, this creates hypervigilance, a nervous system trained to scan for threat, even in intimacy. Your body stays alert, even when nothing is wrong. Your emotions rise and are immediately evaluated for risk. This pattern is closely tied to avoidant attachment, not because you don't want connection, but because closeness once felt unsafe. Distance became regulation. Self-sufficiency became survival. Your brain's default mode network, the system responsible for self-referential thought, begins to organize around control rather than expression. You don't ask, "What do I feel?" You ask, "What is safe to show?" And slowly, subtly, your identity reshapes. You become the reliable one, the calm one, the strong one. But strength, when it is enforced instead of chosen, becomes a cage. There is a grief that lives here, an invisible grief, the grief of all the emotions that never had witnesses, the grief of being praised for composure when what you needed was protection, the grief of being admired for resilience when what you wanted was rest. Carl Jung once warned that whatever we deny in ourselves does not disappear, it waits. And what waits long enough begins to speak through symptoms. You feel it when simple moments feel heavy, when joy arrives and you don't know how long it's allowed to stay, when sadness shows up and you immediately translate it into productivity, logic, or silence. You feel it when you crave intimacy but recoil from exposure, when you want to be understood but fear being seen accurately, when you are surrounded by people yet emotionally alone. The core fear underneath all of this is not weakness. It is not inadequacy. It is the fear of being emotionally unprotected. You learn that some people do not respond to feelings with care. They respond with dominance, dismissal, or withdrawal. So you adapted. But adulthood reveals the cost of that adaptation. You might notice it in relationships. You stay composed during conflict while resentment quietly accumulates. You struggle to ask for reassurance, even when you need it. You feel safer being needed than being known. You might notice it in your career. You excel under pressure but feel empty without it. You tie worth to competence, not authenticity. Rest makes you uneasy because survival once required constant readiness. You might notice it in your self-worth. You measure value by usefulness. You dismiss your own emotional needs as indulgent or unnecessary. You feel guilt when you want softness. You might notice it in your boundaries. You either over-fortify or under-assert. You struggle to say this hurt me without justifying it. You fear that emotional honesty will cost you connection. You might notice it in emotional regulation. You intellectualize feelings instead of inhabiting them. You explain pain instead of feeling it. You stay fine long past the point of honesty. And perhaps most painfully, you might notice it in your internal identity. You don't know who you are without the mask. You don't know what you feel until it becomes unavoidable. You don't trust emotions unless they're controlled. But here is what matters. These are not personality traits. They are coping strategies. And coping strategies can be witnessed, softened, and eventually retired. Healing does not begin by forcing yourself to open up. That only repeats the violence of exposure without safety. Healing begins with witnessing, not fixing, not judging, not gaslighting yourself into gratitude. Witnessing the moment you shut down, witnessing the reflex to stay composed, witnessing the fear underneath restraint. Inner child reparenting asks a simple but radical question: what did I need when I learned to hide? Often, the answer is not expression, it is protection, permission, choice. Shadow work invites you to meet the parts of yourself that learn to disappear. Not to shame them, but to thank them. They kept you alive. They kept you intact. Nervous system regulation teaches your body what your mind already knows, that not every connection is a threat, that presence can exist without performance, that safety does not require silence. And slowly, gently, you practice choosing softness over survival. Not with everyone, not all at once, but with discernment. Because the goal is not to show emotion to everyone. The goal is to choose, consciously, who earns access. As Viktor Frankl wrote, between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is your freedom. Your restraint does not make you broken, it makes you experienced. But you are allowed to outgrow the armor that no longer fits. You are allowed to feel without defending, to speak without rehearsing, to be seen without bracing. The goal is not to be fixed, it is to become whole. And if this resonated, if you felt named rather than judged, share it with someone who learned to survive quietly. Subscribe if you want more spaces like this, where strength is redefined, and healing does not require abandoning yourself. You don't owe the world your emotions.